Good morning, I'm Marilyn Carroll, President of the League of Women Voters, and I sadly am the bearer of sad tidings. As you can see, we only have, what we're very fortunate to have, two of our outstanding legislators today. John Frey sends his regrets, Linda and I got an email last night from John saying, I'm really sorry about having to send this email. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend tomorrow's League annual meeting. I've been battling a viral infection for 10 days or so, and I haven't left my house for 7. He went to the doctor's yesterday, and the doctor suggested it is likely that he can spread whatever it is that he has and to stay home. And as John said, I rarely get sick, so this is particularly frustrating, and I haven't missed one of these events in the past 21 years. And I know for the last 10 I've been to all these meetings, and John has always been there. So I held off hoping my illness would lift, but that apparently hasn't happened in a timely manner for me to appear tomorrow. So Linda and I sent felicitations to him last night and suggested to him, if he was feeling up to it, that perhaps he might like to send his thoughts about some of the questions that Linda had already sent him. And he was kind enough at 9:30 last night to answer the questions that we had already sent to him and to Will and Ken. So Linda will be relaying his responses to some of the questions. So we apologize, but fortunately he was kind enough not to spread whatever it is that he has to all of us. So I'm going to start all over again. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for coming today. We'd like to thank the National Charity League, the Nutmeg Chapter, for providing refreshments. And we particularly would like to thank the library for, again, being our excellent co-sponsor and partner for this event. Now, before I turn this meeting over to Mrs. Hanley, who will officially introduce our legislators to you and give you the ground rules of how we're going to proceed, I'd just like to take a minute to talk to you about what an important year this is. 2020 is the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. And the 100th anniversary of the founding of the League of Women Voters, which was founded 6 months prior to the ratification of the amendment in anticipation of helping women learn how to get involved in politics and learn how to use their vote. And the other really important thing, other than the election, which we all know is very important, is the census that is being conducted this year. When you came into this room, you'll notice that there's a table in the back that has information about all these activities and events. First of all, you'll find brochures for the Votes for Women. Ridgefield celebrates the 19th Amendment series of programs. If you'll notice, I'm wearing a yellow rose, which is what the pro-suffragists wore to indicate they wanted their legislators to vote for the amendment. So you'll see these around town, and as time goes by, you'll have an opportunity to donate to get one yourself. So we hope during the course of the year you'll be wearing the yellow rose as well. You'll also notice that the Votes for Women banner is above the elevator. That's to signify the 1911 Votes for Women banner that was an original that was marched with from the women in Ridgefield. We had a replica made for that, and we will be carrying that in the Labor Day Parade. It will be on display through the month of March for our exhibit, which will be on March 1st, and you'll have wonderful reception on March 1st. So that Votes for Women banner will be proudly displayed throughout the town. Also in August, it will be hanging in a Keeler Tavern. You'll also notice that there are voter registration forms, which I mentioned before. For those of you, this is probably the choir to whom I'm speaking, but if you've changed your address, you need to indicate that on the voter registration form. If you are an unaffiliated voter and would like to vote in the primary on April 28th, you need to do that. So you do that. You're welcome to change your affiliation if you choose. Unfortunately, it's too late to vote in the primary if you change your affiliation now. That was required to be done 90 days prior to the primary. You'll also find a 2020 census sheet with answers concerning the census and how important it is to answer those 10 quick survey questions. Please remember that the government only conducts the census every 10 years. It's vitally important that everyone whether you're a citizen or not. The answer is that census. It determines the number of seats each state will get in Congress. It determines the distribution of billions of dollars of public funds for things like educational programs, health care, law enforcement, and highways. And it also provides business leaders and entrepreneurs information about creating jobs and growing our national economy. So please take a look at that, and remember that the library is also providing a census public information session right here at the library on February 29th at 11 a.m. It's also been a great year for the Ridgefield League, and we hope in addition to attending those Votes for Women series programs, of which we are a co-sponsor with the Ridgefield Library, the Ridgefield Historical Society, the Keeler Tavern Museum and History Center, and the Drumhill chapter of DAR, you'll attend a lot of our league events as well, starting with our art raffle kickoff on March 10th with a painting from renowned Ridgefield artist Tina Sturgis, our Get to Know Your Town meeting on April 14th with the New Inland Wetlands Board with the chair Pat Sesto. Our annual meeting is on May 16th, and we will be featuring our speaker Gloria Brown Marshall afterwards at that meeting. And you're all welcome to march with us in that Memorial Day Parade on May 25th. Get your yellow roses, we'll bring you right in, and wear a white shirt. And finally, on June 3rd, the League is really thrilled to be working with Ridgefield High School on a community discussion using the Harvard case study method with a Ridgefield High School teacher, Elena Rampola, who was trained in this method last summer. And she will be discussing, facilitating a discussion about Martin Luther King and whether he should have crossed the bridge in 1965. To participate in this community discussion, you need to agree to read the case study, which we send a month in advance. Look at some questions that are going to be posed and come prepared to be a participant in the discussion. There's more information in the back about that. It's probably going to fill up pretty quickly, so if you would like to do that, Amanda Cordano, are you here, Amanda? Raise your hand, see either Amanda or I, and we will be happy to take your name if you'd be interested in doing that. And finally, I'd like really, again, to thank you all for participating in this important event. The League and the Library presents this program every single year so that our legislators can let us know what is happening in the current legislative session in Hartford and to discuss the bills before them that are of particular interest to us all. Ridgefield is a very civil and respectful community, so we ask that we continue in that tradition and ensure that the questions you ask are presented in a courteous manner and that you refrain from making long speeches and ask a succinct question so that everyone who would like to ask a question has time to participate. And if you go on too long or things become contentious, we will politely ask you to wrap it up. Or if inappropriate comments are made from the audience, we will not hesitate to intervene and, if necessary, ask the offending parties to leave the meeting. And I'm sure that's not going to be necessary, but we may have to encourage you to get to the point, which I'm going to do right now, and bring any personal issues that you may have to the legislators after the meeting. And with that, I will now ask Mrs. Linda Hanley, who has been handling these meetings for, how long, Linda? More than 20 years. Will ably take over this entire event. Thanks so much, everybody. Oh, and let me just say, you're going to be marching down this aisle for the questions. Linda will explain that more.
I've lived in Ridgefield for 44 years. I've been a member of the League of Women Voters for more than that. My mother was a member of the League of Women Voters. So it's a tradition in our family. And there's only one day of the year I say, please don't snow, please no ice. And we have a beautiful sunny day, and thank you all for coming. On my immediate left is Representative Kenneth Gucker, and he has the strangest geographic district in the state. And Senator Will Haskell from Senate District 26. So do you have any opening remarks you want to make? What I'm going to do is I am going to ask questions that are of interest to the League of Women Voters of Connecticut pertaining to legislation that will be before the legislature during this session. And then after I have finished with my questions. The floor is open to you for your questions. Any opening statements?
So I want to thank you all for coming out today. I want to thank the league for having this great event. Yes, the weather is a lot nicer than the first time I came down here. There was torrential rain and floods and other things happening. And I will attest to Representative Frey being ill. We started banking together, and he was absent for our committee meetings because he was ill. As somebody who never gets sick, like he doesn't, last year I went to serve. I was sick 3 times in 1 month. My girlfriend looked at me and said, "We've been together 10 years. I've only seen you sick once. You've been sick 3 times in the last month and a half." I'm like, I don't know if it's the job, the drive, or the building, but something is definitely different. So I look forward to your questions, your comments. I find these events to be very informative because I'm a firm believer that we can't represent you if we don't know what your concerns and issues are. It's sometimes we may think we have the answers, or we may think we have the background, but it might be that little piece that sometimes somebody mentions, hey, did you look or think of something from this general area? Maybe you might want to relook at it. So I am looking forward to your questions, and I want to thank the league for this opportunity.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Haskell. I'm so thrilled to be here today. I represent Ridgefield as well as 6 other towns in the state senate. Like Ken, this is my first term in the legislature, and I want to echo what Ken said. I always walk away from meetings like this one, especially those that are organized by the League of Women Voters, having learned so much, often something very specific, an area where we can lend a hand. Maybe it's an issue on your road that needs to be fixed. Maybe it's that you can't contact the right person at the DMV. But then there are also some fantastic legislative ideas that the constituents raise. And I think that our #1 job as legislators is to do more listening than we do talking. So I will keep my opening remarks very brief, but I look forward to hearing from all of you and answering your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. The first question I ask is going to be...
Could you just put a short session for a minute?
Oh,
You
yes.
should do that, and
Okay.
it's important, I think.
This is the short session. It began in February and ends in May. And as I understand it, any piece of legislation has to have a budget component during this short session. What happens with the legislation?
Individual legislators, if they're proposing a bill, it has to have a fiscal impact, but committee chairs can raise bills that have no fiscal impact. So the rules are sort of wonky, but we have 13 weeks to get the job done.
Right, and you can do anything you want. You can, if you get the committee chairman then to introduce the bill.
It has to be introduced as a committee bill, so the entire committee has to put it in. It can't be for a long session. Anybody can put in a bill on anything, on any other committee. So it becomes somewhat difficult that if, say, I'm serving in banking and I want to do something in the environment, I have to somehow get somebody in the environment to actually support it and put it through the committee.
Thanks. So we're in the short session. Thanks, Marilyn. This will be in the area of election administration reform. Which of the following election administration reforms are you most likely to support in the 2020 short session? Automatic voter registration, election processes, and funding the replacement of voting machines. Start with
It's simple, all of the above. Last year we tried to do some early voting stuff. It did not get all the way through. Went through the House. It stumbled in the Senate to where we believe that we should be opening voting to all who can attend, just as important as the census would be. It is important to have people's voices heard, have them be represented, and give them an opportunity to participate. So the more we make it open to people, that it will be. And I actually set up the voting places in Danbury in the off-season to help the registered voters there. And I can tell you the fold-out boxes are getting pretty tired and using it again. Yes, we need to replace a lot of that equipment at this point.
I would also and will also support all of the above reforms. I was at a press conference with Secretary of State Denise Merrill earlier this week where she laid out her election reform bill that has a variety of components. And one of the reporters said, well, which of these is the most important to you? And she said, there's a reason that they're all in one bill. And that's the fact that we need wholesale reform to make sure that our democracy really is accessible to all. Ken mentioned early voting. Connecticut is one of only 10 states in the country that offers one Tuesday in November to vote. This isn't a Republican-Democratic issue. Texas has 30 days of early voting. West Virginia has 10 days of early voting. There's no reason that in Connecticut we can't offer Saturday, Sunday, and Monday in addition to Tuesday. So it's just a little bit easier for commuters and single working parents and students and seniors to participate. But the reforms you mentioned, the one that really I think is most overdue is automatic voter registration. I don't opt in to my right to speak freely. I don't opt in to any of my other constitutional rights. I think that you shouldn't have to opt in to the right to vote. When you go and interact with the Connecticut Department of Motor Vehicles, you should be automatically registered to vote unless you opt out, unless you choose not to. We've seen this happen in many other states, red states and blue states, and it increases participation in our elections. I think that's something we can all celebrate, regardless of your party. Our democracy is stronger when more people participate, not fewer. So I'll be supporting all of those reforms.
The next question is in voter. Oh, thanks. I can't hold it. Yes, these, and I'm just going to read them word for word so that I don't put words into his mouth. Under automatic voter registration, expands the scope and reach of government. Government and the Secretary of the State have proposed the past couple of years, and again this year, we're hearing a bill from the Secretary of the State next Friday. I need to see the specifics. We've done a lot to increase voter registration, online, Department of Motor Vehicles, etc. As an aside, I wish we could mandate participation of those registered. Absentee ballots. While there are ways the absentee ballot process needs to be improved, perhaps eliminating the double envelope, cut down on the number of ways for an absentee ballot application and vote to go wrong, and someone to not have their vote counted. Clean up the statute to make more people who work most of the election day be eligible to vote absentee ballot. This is also the area in which voting sees the most fraud and abuse, particularly in our cities. Further, until we can guarantee security, it's not wise to move forward with proposals to put absentee ballots online. New voting machines. These machines we use now aren't particularly old, and I haven't heard their age as a concern, but since the League of Women Voters is asking, it must be an issue in some localities. I have no idea how much this costs, but if it's budgeted properly and cuts are made elsewhere to pay for it, sure. Under voter protection, in 2011, CTN, and that's the Connecticut Network, shed light on redistricting process by covering the reapportionment commission's meetings and congressional district public hearings. Ahead of this process being repeated in 2021, do you think CTN has adequate resources to repeat this coverage as well as coverage of the regular legislative session? How can citizens follow the process for General Assembly districts as well as for congressional districts?
I thought I was still reading John's.
No, I'm sorry, I went on to voter protection.
We got it, that's okay.
Okay, all right, sorry.
In terms of voter protection and I really would categorize it under transparency. For those who aren't familiar, CTN is an amazing resource. If I'm running late to a meeting at the Capitol, almost everything that happens in that building is live streamed, and I'm sure I've never seen the viewership numbers, but I'm sure they're quite small because I was actually just knocking doors a few months ago in Ridgefield, and a gentleman said, "Oh, I don't pay much attention to Connecticut politics." And I said, "Really? How long have you lived here?" He said, I mostly watch New York politics, but I've lived here for 36 years. So there is a disconnect. I think Ken would agree, there's something odd about representing Fairfield County in a legislature that can feel very disconnected. And one of my goals is to try to make sure that constituents in this area really do feel connected to their state government and have some sense of what's going on there. So ahead of redistricting, which is such a crucial process within our democracy, in which decides not only the boundaries of our legislative districts, but also the boundaries of Congressman Hyde and Representative John Hayes, it's so crucial that citizen voices are heard, but also that citizens have an eye on those meetings. And I'm a believer that sunshine is the best disinfectant, making sure that television cameras are in the room, ensures that all of our colleagues act in an honorable and fair manner.
Yeah, CTN itself is a very underused thing that we have in the Capitol. In fact, a funny story, my girlfriend was getting used to not being around much and going into some of these public hearings that go into the following day. And she calls me up and says, "Where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm still at the Capitol, I'm still at a public hearing." "You can't be, it's 1 o'clock in the morning." I'm like, "Do me a favor, turn on CTN." She turned on CTN and I went like this. And, it's like, yes, we do have these events where we're very late, but it adds a lot to the transparency. In fact, the other real good thing about CTN is they will replay the hearings you may have missed. So if you go into the schedule when there's something not happening at the Capitol, you can go in and watch it again. So if you missed a testimony that you wanted to get some more information on, you can go back, or you can go online and look at their archives and actually watch those things. So it does give not only the representatives and the senators a vehicle to be able to go back and maybe miss, we may have missed a meeting. Like, for example, yesterday I was in 2 public hearings at the same time. Now, I don't know how I did it, but it was like 20 minutes in this room and then we're 20 minutes in that room. But it's very important to be at these public hearings so we're going to be able to hear what people are saying. So now I can at least go back, replay the CTN video, and see what I may have missed, and maybe see some of the concerns or questions that people had come forward to make the trip all the way up to Hartford. Because I do feel that if somebody is willing to make the drive, we do it every day, driving from one extreme of the state to get to Hartford, to sit in line and wait 4, 5, 6 hours sometimes to be able to testify. At least what we can do is be there to hear what they have to say and take their concerns into account, so that when we look at, when we go back into committees to look at, well, geez, the bill may have looked good, but, remember this testimony that was given by one individual, we should really look into that. I forget the other half of the question.
How can citizens follow the process for the General Assembly districts as well as congressional districts?
I think, again, that would be good with the use of CTN. And the other thing I want to talk about exactly with the redistricting, this is why the census is so important. Because with the census numbers, they have to redistrict to make sure that the parties are balanced. So if they do a population check and find out, we just went through this in Danbury a number of years ago, to where you find that one area of town has gone more to one way or the other, maybe more Democrat or more Republican, you have to balance that out within 3%, so that you have equal representation in these districts. So again, it's another reason why the census is so important. It not only affects, again, all of your financing coming in, but where your district lines are going to be, and of course the balance of power of who's representing you in those districts. So yes, it's very important.
If you're not familiar with CTN, Connecticut Network, go online and take a look at it. You really get a picture of what's going on in the legislature by watching this. And I don't know the URL, but if you just search for Connecticut Network, it will come up and you will be able to.
It's on your TV too.
Yeah. What channel, okay, what channel is it? 20.
I think it depends on who your cable
Oh,
provider
through the
is.
cable provider. Okay, well, take a look at CTN if you want to really get up to date with what's going on at the legislature. Another question, and John's response is for this. Border security measures we've not seen specifics. This bill hasn't been drafted yet. It will depend on what the Secretary of State is looking for, but ballot integrity is a must.
I think that might be a previous question.
Okay. Under border protection, yeah. That's what they were responding to. And there is an article in the Danbury News Times this morning about the Secretary of the State and the bill that she is going to be introducing. It's covered this morning. Okay. Okay. Will you support the Secretary of the State's voter security measures to keep Connecticut's election process secure from hackers near and far?
Well, I was just, like I said, I happened to see the Secretary of State earlier this week, and John's right, we haven't seen specific legislative language, but what I do know is she's looking for funding to modernize our actual voting system. The ballot booth, the ballots themselves, the scanners, the infrastructure is becoming outdated. And Connecticut can pride itself on having some of the most secure, reliable elections in the entire country. What happened in Iowa is never going to happen in Connecticut, and I think that that's something we ought to be proud of. But it's also, there's almost no amount of money that is too much to make sure that that process continues to earn citizens' trust, and that every voter, when they decide to show up on that Tuesday in November, makes sure and has the peace of mind that their vote will be counted. So I don't serve on the Appropriations Committee, but I am the Vice Chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee, and I'm wholly supportive of making sure that the Secretary of State, and also, really importantly, local town registrars and town clerks have the resources they need to run an effective, fair, and honest election.
I'm not sure I can add much more to that, but I can tell you that our Secretary of States in the past have been very concerned with securing and making sure our ballots are counted, and that's why we went with the optical scan machine that we use today. Because we have that paper ballot backup, so that in case we need to go back and check or to make sure the votes are actually being counted properly, we have that. I've been in many recounts, and I will tell you, there's no way they can hack into those machines because they're not connected to the outside world. We've had other states where it was online voting, like almost like going to an ATM machine. It goes to a server somewhere where we don't know. So we're not sure exactly how secure those are. We also did not have a paper backup in some of those. With this, the audits that we've done in Danbury, and Danbury's been audited quite a few times, because the Secretary of State will actually pick out random areas throughout the state and do an audit just to make sure that things are being counted properly. And every audit that I've been at, the paper ballots have matched the machines 100%. There has never been an oddity or any kind of piece that looks a little questionable. Everything has been counted. So I firmly believe that Denise will be just as thorough as she's been in the past, and it's important to all that we have safe and secure votes with accurate vote count.
The next area is campaign finance. What is your personal experience with the public financing of elections through the Citizens Election Program? How would you improve and support CEP?
So, for those who aren't familiar, CEP is the Citizens Election Program, and it is the only reason that somebody like myself can afford to run for office. In other states that don't have public financing, it's largely the wealthiest person wins. But in this state, it's not about how many checks you can collect, it's about how many votes you earn. And the reason that system works so well is it puts every single candidate, whether they've been in office for a decade or whether they're brand new, whether they're a millionaire or whether they are not, it puts us all on an equal playing field. It prioritizes how many small dollar donations we can receive. So Ken and I were just chatting. We've each reached the threshold in terms of how many $5, $10, $15 checks we've received from constituents in our district. So now we qualify for this grant, and we can't spend any more than that grant, and we won't spend any less. And the same will likely be true of our opponents. That's provided that everybody participates in the Citizens Election Program. It shouldn't be controversial because Democrats and Republicans utilize the program to a wide degree of success, but it seems that it is consistently on the chopping block. It is the first thing that some of my colleagues look to when they want to make cuts in the state government. I think that that's a real mistake. Already, our democracy is not very representative. I don't help that very much. We're both white men, but there are not enough women in the legislature. There are not enough people of color in the legislature. There's not generational diversity in the legislature. We need to, I think, elect a state government that looks a lot more like the state, and that can only happen when it's affordable and possible for everybody to run for office regardless of their financial situation. So when it comes to improving the CEP, I'm not sure that it could be improved anymore. The biggest fight that I'm waging right now in the GE committee is just trying to make sure it isn't cut, trying to make sure that it remains in place for elections and hopefully for generations to come.
So the CEP, Will's exactly right. The CEP does help people like ourselves be able to afford to run for office, because what actually brought the CEP into play was the corruption of the Rowland administration. You know, the pay for play, you know, the lobbyist money, the big dollars coming in to buy influence. With the CEP, the most that somebody could donate to a campaign is $250, and as little as $5. You're not buying somebody's loyalty for $250. If you are, then we really need to look at our priorities. But it's, again, it's small donations, but it's a threshold of the amount of money that you have to raise, but then also a certain amount of that has to come from people in your constituency, in your areas. So you're not reaching out to lobbyists in Washington, you're not reaching out to people out of state. You're trying to connect with the people who live in your community, the people that you represent. It also, in a kind of a sideways work, makes us have to get on the phones, knock on the doors, and actually reach out and talk to all of you to get your support yet again to help us run. So it's another connection that we make back to the people we hope to represent. Now, the other thing with the CEP, the money does not come from your taxes. It comes from unclaimed funds. Those nickels and dimes that you don't return your bottles to the store, guess what? Goes into unclaimed funds. Somebody passes away with an estate, they have no heirs, they don't know what to do with the money. It goes into these unclaimed funds. So it's not a tax. It doesn't come from your taxes. It comes from these unclaimed funds. Now there has been this active process of trying to cut and get rid of this program and maybe reallocate that somewhere else. I can't think of any reason why we would want to invite back the corruption that we got rid of the lobbyists, of the corporate interests in buying our elections. You know, we look at the legislature and who serves. What do we have? We have lawyers, we have real estate agents, we have, what was the third? Lawyers, real estate agents, and retirees, and one car mechanic. That's me. You know, the irony, I speak, the business in Hartford has kind of died down as far as auto repair because people realize I can fix cars, and they catch me in the hallway and say, hey, I got this problem with my car. You know, can you take a look at it for me? Next thing I know, I'm in the parking garage with my scanner, and I'm going, okay, you need this and this and this. It should only cost you X amount of dollars. Don't worry what the mechanic says. But it's because of the CEP that I'm able to do that. So I think the program, I don't know how we could expand it. I think it's a great program, and I think it would be a real loss to not only the legislature, but to you, the people, getting honest representation that if this was cut.
And Representative Frey's answer is, improving CEP, SEEC, is often a black box, and their process can be maddening. For starters, they often reject qualifying contributions without giving a reason, and then, instead of refunding the campaign's treasurer these contributions so he can give them back to the donor, the state keeps the money. That must be fixed. The agency isn't particularly user-friendly. The treasurer's job is very, very difficult. The program in general has helped encourage candidates to seek office. That's the good thing. Now moving on.
We're in agreement.
Yes, yes. It's a good thing. Moving on to the bottle bill. Would you support and co-sponsor a bill to expand and modernize Connecticut's bottle bill? Bullet point number 1, expand the bottle bill to include non-carbonated beverages, wine, and liquor. 2, increase the deposit on covered containers to 10 cents. 3, raise the handling fee for redemption centers and authorized retailers, 3.5 cents. On the bottle bill.
Sure, since I serve on a committee, it's the Environment Committee that's handling this right now. The reason why the bottle bill was started many, many generations ago, in fact, I think it was under Grasso, was a way of cleaning up our streets. I mean, how many people will drive down the street, finish their soda or their can or whatever, and just throw it out the window? And then we wind up with the debris on the side of the road. So this became a way of having individuals hopefully return and recycle their material. The bottle bill, I believe it should be expanded. I mean, one of the biggest things I hear from our local governments is, can you please do something about those little nip bottles? They're everywhere. I can tell you what the average life of a nip bottle is because I live about a mile and a half from a liquor store, and they somehow all wind up along in my front yard. So we're constantly cleaning these things up. We would like to see expansion of that. The other thing that needs to be overhauled is glass has become a problem with the single-stream recycling. What is happening is people are taking the recycling, they're putting them in plastic bags, they're leaving them at the curb, or they're bringing them to the redemption center. When they get thrown into the dumpster or thrown into the truck, the glass breaks. When the glass breaks, it tears the bag. When the bag tears, when it goes into the single-stream recycling machine apparatus, it jams up the machine. So they have to constantly stop the machine, pull all the debris out of the machine, and throw the whole load away, so it winds up in the burn plant, doesn't wind up in the recycling. We need to come up with a way of pulling glass out of the single-stream recycling system. And the way to do that is to expand the bottle bill. So what we would hope to do would be able to expand out to wine bottles and other glass material, to pull the glass out of single-stream, have a separate redemption for that. And I also believe that we should open up a redemption center. Let's not put this so much on the liquor stores, on the grocery stores, and on the other businesses that have to deal with the end result of this. So that maybe we actually get a cleaner stream of recycling, that the brown bottles wind up with the brown bottles, the clear bottles wind up with the clear bottles, the blue bottles. I mean, I'm old enough, I mean, long time ago, we actually had recycling in the 70s. I used to volunteer with the local JCs in my hometown of New Fairfield at the time, and would spend my Saturdays at the recycling center behind the wooden homemade tables, separating out the cans, the bottles, and other things to make sure. And we need to revamp and maybe go back to that process to ensure that these valuable commodities, because glass is actually a very valuable commodity. The concrete distributors want to start using it. They want to use it for road beds. They want to use it for the reflective paint that you see on the roads. All that is glass material. But if they can't get that material to where it could be recycled and reused, it winds up in our landfill, it winds up in a burn situation, it winds up where we would never want to intend it. So we are looking at that. I believe we should expand the bottle bill. There are some that wanted to get rid of the bottle bill altogether. I can't tell you how dirty your streets would be. I mean, if somebody wants to sit there and pick up all those bottles and take them back to that redemption center, absolutely. And lastly, bringing up the redemption money, yes, we should bring back I think they call it the tears, back to those who would take in this recycling. Because in the long run, it's actually going to help us. The less that we put in the landfill, the less that we throw out, and the more that we can reuse, the less our footprint is on the ecology of this world.
Ken's answer is basically perfect. It's hard to add anything to that. I'm absolutely in support of the bottle bill because it's the right thing to do for our natural environment. And when faced with the choice, we always have to decide on making sure that the next generation has a clean air and clean water and clean streets to one day inherit. So yes, I think we need to increase the deposit rate, which by the way has not been increased for decades. I also think that Ken's right. We shouldn't put the collection responsibility on the local retailers. This morning I met with a small business owner in Ridgefield. She owns a local liquor store. She's wholly in support of trying to increase the deposit rate and support the bottle bill, but she's stretched pretty thin as a small business owner. She does not want to be responsible for collecting those returned items. So I think that Ken's exactly on the right track. And as a member of the Environment Committee, I'll be supporting the legislation. It's the next step in a variety of things that we need to do. I was proud in the last session that we banned plastic bags. 18 billion pounds of plastic end up in the ocean every year. My hometown of Westport banned the plastic bags a decade ago, and consumer behavior has changed. If you stand outside the supermarket, as you do, if you're running for office, you will find in Westport that everybody remembers to bring a reusable bag now. We also transitioned more of Connecticut's energy grid to renewable sources. Thanks to brand new wind energy projects, 40% of our energy will come off of the shores of New London and Bridgeport. That's $2 billion of economic activity, in addition to being good for the environment. The last thing I want to say about the bottle bill is, even if you don't care about the environment, there's a really important, Ken touched on this, a really important fiscal impact here. And that's that towns used to make money off of recycling, but India and China have passed more stringent guidelines when it comes to the contamination of their recycled material. And we were just in a scenario where Connecticut sent literally tons of recycled material on a barge to India only to have it turned away. It is now no longer a source of profit, and I think Rudy would concur with this, it is no longer a source of profits for our town governments. Instead, it's a tremendous loss. So anything we can do to get that material out of the recycling stream is crucially important. The harder conversation we're eventually going to have is that we no longer really have a market for single-stream recycling, and we might have to re-educate consumers about separating their trash.
And Representative Frey's response. Here is a link to an OLR, the Office of Legislative Research, issue brief that goes over the current iteration of the bottle bill. It gives a good explanation of how the bill works and what types of containers fall under the bill. I want to note that there is no language for the bottle bill as yet. Additionally, the speaker recently convened a blue ribbon panel on recycling. They held one meeting, which was pretty much an organizational meeting. They are supposed to come up with recommendations on recycling here in Connecticut, including the bottle bill. I did vote in favor of the expansion of the bottle bill, House Bill 7294 last year, which would have increased the redemption fee to 10 cents. Expanded the list of containers that are covered under the bill, raised the handling fee, etc. The bill passed the House but did not pass the Senate. If similar, I'd support again and possibly co-sponsor. So along with this Connecticut network, there is an Office of Legislative Research, and you can go online and get another wealth of information, reports, and things that the Connecticut Legislature is dealing with. Okay. The next question is back to the census. What are you doing to support a complete count in the 2020 census, and have you identified the hard to count areas in your district? Libraries and community centers will play a big role in providing computers and places for community-based and language experts to assist people in completing the 2020 census. How will you support them?
So a really important first step is combating misinformation. So many of the, I don't represent many of the hard to count areas, but communities like Bridgeport, where there is a population of undocumented individuals, there sometimes can be a strain of misinformation that if you are not a documented citizen, then you should not fill out a census. And of course it is exactly the opposite. The census has a responsibility to count all the people living in Connecticut, regardless of their immigration status. And if this myth continues to percolate, what we will have as a result is communities that are vastly undercounted, and as a result will be underrepresented, not temporarily, but for a decade. So it's crucial to raise awareness and make sure that everyone knows that completing the census is not contingent upon being a citizen. It's also important to make sure we're doing proper outreach, and this comes into the communities that I represent, to seniors who may not be checking their mail as regularly, may not see word about the census on social media. It's really important to do that outreach, going door to door. So Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysewicz has been a tremendous leader on the census. We've done dozens of census kickoffs. The next one I think is next week in New Canaan. The phase they're in right now, just so everyone knows, in case you've got a family member looking for a job, the census wants to hire people who live in the communities in which they will be serving, and these jobs pay $25 an hour. So they're temporary in nature, but they serve an absolutely vital role in the democratic process, and check out the Census Bureau online for those opportunities.
Will's absolutely right, and I was just checking on my phone just to make sure I got this right. Lieutenant Governor Bysewicz will be in Danbury on Monday at 10 o'clock to do a press conference on the census. So if anybody had any questions or concerns, you can come to Danbury. I will be there as well. I do represent some of those hard-to-count areas. Like we said earlier, I have one of the strangest districts. I have people of all races, all colors, all orientation, all fiscal jobs, no matter what. I have some houses that are, $60,000, $70,000 for a house, all the way up to like $5.6 million houses, all in the same district. So when you talk about trying to represent a swath of people, it's quite diverse. And in Danbury, there is and has been this fear. There are a lot of undocumented. I think we have a 31% rate of foreign-born citizens just in my district alone. That doesn't cover a lot of downtown Danbury. Out of that, 11% are registered to vote, which is pretty sad. So we're looking at 20% of the population that A isn't voting, B may not even be registered to vote. But they should be counted because, again, they are still using our services, they are living in our communities, and it also affects our schools and our fundings and things of that sort. So we need to have everybody counted. But there's this fear that if they answer the door, are they going to be arrested? Are they going to be taken away? There's a huge disinformation campaign going on, causing people to fear and hide. And that hurts us all. I mean, we are still responsible for educating, we're still responsible for protecting our people, but if we don't get an accurate count, we don't get what we need financially and supportively and legislatively to make sure that all of our communities are protected. So the census is extremely important. And how do we combat these hard-to-get areas? The census is the census workers are looking for especially people who speak dual languages, Spanish, Indian, Hindu, different languages that we can send them into these various communities. I've knocked on thousands and thousands of doors in Danbury, and I've walked with some immigrants, and they can tell by the sound of the music coming out the door whether they're Ecuadorian or whether they're Dominican or whether they are Brazilian, just by the music. And those languages are slightly different. So it is important to have people that represent those communities feel secure and encourage them to at least answer the door and get an accurate count.
And the library is having a program, is it next Sunday?
No, it's Saturday at
Saturday.
11 with Yvette Rose, who's our regional census rep, and she'll be here to answer questions
In this room?
in this room.
Next Saturday, 11 a.m. So if you want to know more about the census, same place next week at 11. Okay, all right. Representative Frey, my district has traditionally had a very good census result. However, it is important that the entire state is accurate, especially when the risk of losing yet another congressional seat is real. There are several task forces working to ensure a 100% census result. The last question from the league. What do you think will be the biggest issues in the 2020 session? How many of you came today to talk about tolls? Not on the table today. What do you think will be the biggest issues in the 2020 session?
It's tough because, again, it's this moving, sliding scale that seems to be happening. When we go up, I sit there, people say, what are you doing next week? I said, I will let you know next week. Just the other day, I had about eight hours notice of, by the way, you have committee meetings tomorrow. So in case you were planning on doing something else, no, you have to come back up. The bills right now are just being raised as concepts. We don't know exactly what they will contain or not. Some of the stuff like the bottle bill and others, they're being flushed out a little bit more at this time. But the way it works is, since we have to do committee bills this year due to the short session, the committees decide to raise a concept or an idea, but we don't have the exact language on how it will affect things, what it will exactly carry. Yes, tolls was going to be the biggest one, and that was a priority of the governor. As we know, that is off the table. There has been a lot of discussion as to why. So I'm not really sure what the big one's going to be. I think the bottle bill and recycling is going to be a big thing. Anything dealing with finances, schools, we much more for schools, and then also making sure that we get the proper money from the federal government that we haven't been getting for reimbursements to help us here in the state, so that we can help distribute that money back out to towns. So I'm not exactly sure what we have yet. We haven't seen the whole pile, but proposals on the table, so we'll see.
Is there a date when a bill must be entered in the session?
There is, it varies by committee.
Yes.
Some committees are already past that deadline. Here are some of the big ones that I've seen so far and that I'm excited about and interested in. Yesterday, the Human Services Subcommittee within the Appropriations Committee heard legislation that would protect funding for Planned Parenthood regardless of what happens in Washington. We see on a federal level a tremendous rollback in support for Planned Parenthood as it pertains to a woman's right to choose and reproductive health and freedom. We want to make sure that Connecticut, regardless of what happens within the Trump administration, is always a state that protects that reproductive health and freedom. So I look forward to supporting that legislation. The committee that I chair, the Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee, heard a bill earlier this week that would provide a tax break for Connecticut graduates who decide to purchase their first home here. It would basically set aside a portion of their income tax to be used on the deposit for their first home. Connecticut does such a wonderful job of educating students, right? We've got some of the best K-12 schools in the entire country. We've got some of the best institutions of higher education in the whole country, from Yale to UConn to Norwalk Community College. It seems to me a tremendous loss that so many of those graduates pick up and decide to start their careers elsewhere. And it's because Connecticut is not exactly affordable for folks my age. We've got to turn that around, and I think luckily the realtors have been tremendous partners in making sure that we provide just as many tax credits, if not more, in our neighboring states to try to make Connecticut appealing to those recent graduates. By the way, that's not just important to draw those graduates back for the sake of having them here. Every business that I visit tells me one of two things. Either they can't find a young, talented, tech-savvy workforce to fill those 21st century jobs. I was at a company in Ridgefield within the last year that charters a bus for a bunch of 20-somethings from Manhattan to come and work at Ridgefield every day, and then it takes them home. Eventually, God forbid, that company may decide that they should just be located in Manhattan. Before they make that decision, we want to make it possible for their employees to actually live in the same community that they work in. The other important economic development tool that I'm not going to stop talking about is transportation improvements. Yes, the negotiations on tolls fell through. I'm tremendously sad about that. I think what happened largely is we stopped listening to each other, and I was disappointed to see some of my colleagues celebrating the fact that nothing is happening. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I've knocked on thousands of doors, and I've never met somebody who's satisfied with the status quo. Nobody should be jumping up and down, regardless of their party, about the fact that we're doing nothing on transportation. And our choices are bleak. If we're not going to do what every other state does, and out-of-state drivers and trucking companies, to pick up some of the tab for our infrastructure improvements, then we've got to pay for it all ourselves. And if we're going to pay for it all ourselves, let's be honest about how that's going to happen. It drives me crazy when I see a headline in the papers that say tolls or no tolls, because that's not really the choice. It's tolls or increased taxes. It's tolls or debt onto the next generation. As the youngest member of the General Assembly, I think it is tremendously unfair to ask your kids and your grandkids to pay for the infrastructure improvements that we've neglected to make for generations, because they're not just going to have to pay for every dollar that we spend, they're going to have to pay for every dollar plus the interest that accumulates. So I'm going to continue to have this conversation. I'm going to continue fighting for it. It looks like an uphill battle at the moment, but eventually Connecticut's going to decide to fund our infrastructure and bring our trains into the 21st century. We're going to decide that it's not good for businesses or the real estate market when our trains are slower today than they were in 1950. I also want to just mention one last issue, and it's something that I knew nothing about when I came into the legislature, but it's, I think it is, if not my number one, then it's my number two priority this year to get passed. And I learned about it because of conversations at town halls like this one. I learned about it when I was out knocking doors. I learned about it from visiting senior centers. And that's the dignity and death issue. Connecticut is not a state that allows folks who are diagnosed with a terminal illness to define their own last chapter. And I've heard from spouses of loved ones who have passed away. I've heard from those who currently have a less than 6-month diagnosis, who are tremendously uncomfortable, and they've gone to extreme lengths. They've starved themselves so that they can be the author of their own last chapter. I think everybody in this state deserves to pass in a manner of their choosing. And we had a bill last year that it was crafted in a way that was safe. It learns from the 10 or 11 other states that have done this. It says look, you have to have that 6-month diagnosis, you have to have 2 doctors sign off, your mental capacity needs to be verified, and you have to administer the medication to yourself. But you want to be able to provide folks with a safety valve. And if you look at other states that have done this, it's not that everybody decides to end their life once they receive that terminal diagnosis. It's that, and if you talk to patients, they'll tell you they want the peace of mind that the option is there. They want that tool in their back pocket. So I've been incredibly moved by those conversations. We fought like crazy to get the bill raised in public health again this year. There'll be a public hearing coming up where I will be testifying, but more importantly, so many of my constituents will be testifying, and hopefully we can get that across the finish line this year.
Okay. Representative Frey's response. Until last week, it was told. That subject has been a distraction and constantly changing for a year. A particular concern was the reaction from New York to the toll on 684. State Senator Peter Parkham, Democrat Lewisboro, has railed against the toll plan and even threatened to file a bill to put up retaliatory New York tolls on state roads leading to Fairfield County, such as routes 35, 116, and 137. This would have been a significant unintended consequence to Ridgefield residents. Tolls aren't dead, rather on pause. And going along with what Representative Gucker and Senator Haskell have said, bills are still being raised and public hearings being scheduled. This year being a 3-month legislative session, we're nearly 1/3 into it. The biggest issues will soon start to identify themselves. So as they do, you can go to Connecticut Network to see what it's all about. You can look at the reports from the Office of Legislative Research. You can contact our legislators and express your opinion on any particular bill that is of interest to you. Ask them questions about legislation that will then finally get in bill form and be submitted to the legislature. So now, I'm finished with the lead questions, and it's your turn. If you have any questions for Representative Gucker or Senator
I
Haskell.
ask you to line up right in this aisle, and then we'll go one by one. I remind you that we're asking questions, not making speeches, so that everyone can have an opportunity to ask a question if they'd like to. We are on a time frame with the library, so please stick to your question, and we would appreciate it. Could you please identify yourself and where you're from? You don't have to give your address, whether you're Ridgefield or Dinner or whatever. Thank you.
Apologize, I get nervous and kind of crash, so my voice is shaking. My name is Ellen Fondo. I live here in Ridgefield. I've been here for almost 10 years now. I actually attended public testimony on Wednesday, about vaccine bill that's on the table. And I guess it was an all-nighter till 22 hours of testimony. And it's really, people got so bogged down with pro-vaccine, and whether you're pro or against. The issue really is way up here, and it's taking parents' parental rights away. Whether your child should undergo a medical procedure does not belong in the state legislature. It's with the parents. So again, it's so important. It's whether you're pro or against. It's not. This isn't the case here. It's the parents' right to choose, and that's again, natural law gives parents the rights to choose. So that's all. That's a very, very serious thing when you're getting to taking away those rights. So thank you so much.
Do you have a question?
How do you plan to vote on that? I know it's in the House, so you don't. But how would you plan to vote on that?
Let me take it first. First of all, thank you so much for that question. I don't serve on the Public Health Committee, and it is a House bill, so I would probably be among the last to vote on it. And the specifics of the legislation matter quite a bit. For those who aren't very familiar with the issue, it's been in the press a little bit, but there are 2 ways in Connecticut that a child may not be vaccinated. One is a medical exemption. There are many young people who suffer, and people of all ages who suffer from autoimmune deficiencies and are consequently not able to receive vaccines. The other exemption that Connecticut, but not every state provides, is a religious exemption. And this is not a fun or enjoyable issue. In fact, it's incredibly tough and incredibly emotional. I met with now dozens of parents on both sides of the issue who are greatly concerned, and regardless of where they come down on it, I've got a lot of respect because at the end of the day, everybody wants the best for their children. I think that you're right. It is important that a parent's right to choose their own, that the health outcomes for their child is tantamount. But if you're going to send that child into public school, I do think that the state has an interest in making sure that every classroom is safe for every student. And I know many parents whose kids have autoimmune deficiencies who do not feel safe sending their children into a classroom that drops below the Center for Disease Control's recommended herd immunity rate. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the CDC says so long as 95% of students are vaccinated, for example, for MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, then there's a herd immunity and it is safe for those who suffer from autoimmune deficiencies and can't get vaccinated. Problem is, we've seen last year the Department of Public Health released data here in Connecticut that showed many school districts are dropping below that 95% recommended level. Coleytown in Westport is now down to 87%. That's really frightening for families who are not able to vaccinate their children for medical reasons. So if you don't want to vaccinate your child, I believe in religious freedom. I'm a supporter of the First Amendment, of course. I think we all are in Harvard. But it seems to me a well-established doctrine of constitutional law that your right to speak freely, your right to exercise your religion freely stops at the moment that it endangers others. And as a result, I am leaning, I can't say for sure because the specifics of the legislation matter, and I would like to see it become a little bit easier for folks who have a medical reason not to get vaccinated to receive that exemption. But I'm leaning towards voting for the law, not with a smile on my face. I know that it's tremendously difficult for many parents. But I do think that if you're going to send your child into public school, we have a duty to make sure that every classroom is safe for every child, regardless of their medical condition. You know, I'll just close by saying I talk about this issue a lot with my grandparents, and my grandmother always tells me the story about her best friend in gym class who stopped coming to school one day, and it turns out she had contracted and eventually passed away from polio. That's something that my generation didn't have to worry about, and it's largely because of vaccines. I didn't have to worry about measles, mumps, rubella. I didn't have to worry about all sorts of diseases, and I want that for the next generation of Connecticut students as well. Thank you for your question.
There's not much I can add to that, because I think we're in perfect agreement on that. And the one area I'm concerned about is how do we expand the medical exemptions, because I've been talking to both sides on this, and the emails we've been getting, you think you've cleared out your email box, an hour later there's 300 more in there dealing with the subject, pro and against. So I think once we see the final language, and like Will has stated, I think we need to do more with the medical exemption aspect of it, so we do protect those who might have issues with getting vaccines to go to maybe worse off than when they started. So I'm looking forward to that final bill of legislation to see what exactly was in it.
Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Trieste Matt. I'm a third-generation Ridgefielder, born and raised here. My question is also on the same religious exemption bill. If HB 44 passes, it will segregate more than 7,800 healthy children from their constitutional right to a free, appropriate public education by removing their exemption. Are you concerned that this could cost Connecticut money and increase taxes because the state will lose federal funding and will need to find new ways to educate and fund the education of this newly segregated group of children?
I'll answer your question with a counter question, and that's, don't you think the students who have an autoimmune deficiency or medical reason that they can't become vaccinated also have a constitutional right to an education?
Sure, I have 5 children. 4 of my children have autoimmune issues. It is incredibly hard to receive a medical exemption because, unfortunately, you cannot legislate doctors to give medical exemptions. You can open legislation and say that you can, but they follow recommendations from the CDC. The CDC only allows 2 contraindications for vaccines. That's having already had an anaphylaxis reaction to a vaccine you received, or having cancer and immune suppressants. Autoimmune conditions such as my children's autoimmune encephalitis, which means inflammation of the brain when they have their autoimmune condition, does not count. Doctors are terrified. They go under medical review if they get exemptions that don't follow the CDC criteria.
Which is exactly why I think we need to do more to make those medical exemptions more accessible to the students who really need them. The issue is that, and I don't serve on the Public Health Committee, but the testimonies have gone for 22 hours, and I watched quite a bit of it. Many of the students, not all, there are those who have religious exemptions, but many of the parents who were testifying did not raise religious objections to vaccines. Their concerns were fundamentally medical. They were worried about the implications for their students and for their children, and they weren't able to get that medical exemption because it is too stringent. So let's put in this legislation, if it passes, language that makes it a little bit easier. But, I'm sorry, you were going to say something.
It's just not a legislative issue. The doctors are going to respond to the CDC and the CDC only. They don't care what the law states because their license goes under review by the medical board, not by the state of Connecticut. In addition to that, I saw the 21 hours of testimony. I'm glad you usually only have to stay over there until 1 a.m. I was there until 8 a.m., 24 hours. And there were concerns about the constitutionality of this bill. There were religious leaders that spoke against this bill. There were parents of healthy unvaccinated children against this bill. There were parents who were afraid that they're going to have to move their children away. My children actually do have exemptions that are medical. I believe that a lot of the people who have religious exemptions do truly have those beliefs, as can be seen by the fact that the highest rates are in Christian schools. Those are where parents are using their religious exemptions because they're concerned about the aborted fetal cells in the vaccines. So it's not just overuse by medical concerns. That is a small portion.
Yeah.
I in chemistry and in one with an IEP.
Are you gonna pay for that? Okay.
Ma'am, I certainly understand where you're coming from. I thank you for being here and sharing that story. I'll just, I want to add one thing, and that's that I received a whole bunch of emails from folks who couldn't come and testify because of their autoimmune deficiencies, and they weren't vaccinated. And I said, hey, it would be great if you could, I don't serve on the Public Health Committee, but I really think they need your perspective. It would be great if you could come up this past Wednesday. They said, I literally can't be in the building. Unfortunately, it is unsafe for me to be around that high concentration of unvaccinated people.
Unvaccinated children are not disease carriers. They do not carry disease. I'm pretty sure that this room has lots of adults that have not received all of their boosters, and I don't think everybody is scared of one of our here. They are all here.
I'm not a doctor.
My name is Wayne Goldman. I've been living in Ridgefield for 14 years. I was wondering, you said that India and China don't do recycling anymore. So what's happening to all of the stuff we're putting in the recycle bin here in Ridgefield and elsewhere? I mean, is it just going into the dump anyway, or what's happening?
It's a really valuable question. It started with China as they put in place more stringent contamination standards. 1/2 of 1% contamination qualified for rejecting a ton of recycled material. They're finding that they no longer have a market for that material, so they're just simply no longer buying it. It started with China, now it's also happening in India and Pakistan. Connecticut's role in this, unfortunately, is that municipalities are being hit the hardest. It threatens property tax increases and things of that nature, and municipalities can no longer make a profit. Unfortunately, what's happening is some of that material is going to a landfill in Pennsylvania that still accepts contaminated material. Not all of it. No, I hope nobody takes this to mean we should stop recycling. Everybody should continue recycling, but what we need to do going forward is rethink and probably in the next few years move away from single stream so that we can regain some of the profits. They are taking it, but now towns have to pay as opposed to be paid for their recycled material.
And there has been, you can contaminate a load of recycling, say even just bottles or glass, if somebody throws an old coffee mug in there. Ceramics will pollute an entire load. So that entire load of possibly recycled valuable material is ruined because of one coffee mug. So we really need to clean up our recycling system to ensure that things are going where they need to be. And lastly, the expenses are there. We ship it out and we ship it back. If they're not going to take it, what do we do with it? Well, then it winds up in the landfill. It winds up being thrown up. single stream recycling was convenient for the trash haulers, because they were the ones that actually said, oh, we can do this, we can make one trip to your house, throw everything in the box, we'll sort it out later. In my previous life, I used to design pre-engineered steel buildings, and we used to design recycling centers. I would sit there magically looking at them going, how are you going to parse out all of this valuable material? How does it happen? We go to the Ambridge recycling system, they're basically throwing it on the floor, shoveling it up in the machine, and throwing it on a conveyor belt, and what falls in the right places, great, what doesn't, winds up, going into our trash system. So it is a big concern, and unless we can actually make this product valuable again and reuse it, we're gonna be drowning in our own garbage process. And lastly, there's been an idea about putting in, digesters. Aerobic digesters. We talked about this in the committee, and what this is taking actually the biodegradable material of the meats, your salads, your things, take that out of the trash stream and get that to an aerobic digester who will turn it into methane and turn it into energy. By taking that material out of the garbage stream, we now don't need the trash to be picked up as often, because you're dealing with the stuff that would normally get rancid and would attract vermin and bugs out of the system. It would be reused, turned into energy. So then maybe now when the trash hauler comes around, he can come around with 2 trucks that now the glass is separated in one bin and everything else is in a separate bin. So these are ideas that we are talking about and floating in the capital at this point.
Joanne and Sarah Duncan. I've been a resident of Ridgefield for 30 years. My question is about health insurance for self-employed people in this state. I'm self-employed, a small business owner, and the choice for us has gone down to just Connecticut. The choice of plans is very expensive and the costs keep going up every year. And I want to know if there's anything being done in the state to look at that, since clearly self-employed small business owners are a very vital part of the state. And if the cost for health insurance keeps going up, with the deductibles getting higher and the out-of-pocket maximums getting higher every year, it's a no-win situation. So is there anything planned for people like me to get better options in the future? Other states have way more options, and the costs are less. And Connecticut just seems to have, since I became self-employed, the choices have gotten less and less and less and less. And want to know if there's anything in the pipeline.
So I believe there is, and actually I'm self-employed as well. Back when I went to become self-employed, it was around 2004, 2005. My first question of now our governor, but then candidate Ned Lamont running against Joe Lieberman, was not about the war. It was about what are we going to do about health care? Because health care, I can see, being a self-employed individual who A, doesn't get sick, very rarely go, if I go to the hospital, I've done something really stupid. I've either cut something I shouldn't cut, or I've injured myself in a method that I need to go to the hospital. But I paid for health insurance every single month and never used it. There was a special plan that was put together by Blue Cross Blue Shield at the time, and I was the very first person to sign up to this. And what they were doing is they were taking self-employed individuals who only had 2 or 3 or 4 people in their company and putting them into one policy together. I drove down to North Haven. I signed back in those days. They actually printed out the papers on a copying machine, and you signed it with a pen, and they made copies of it, not like today with digital technology. But what I watched was my rates were going up 30, 40 to 50% every single year, and I was not using it. And you're right, the deductibles, and you wouldn't even know the deductibles were going up until you actually went to get a medical procedure, and by the way, the hospital hit you with a $200 or $300 bill, going, wait a minute, this was 50, well, that was last year. It is a big problem, and I know they are discussing healthcare reform, possibly some sort of universal healthcare, and in that we're also looking at prescription drugs, bringing down the cost of prescription drugs. It was a bill last year that was run through the House that passed that would partner with companies to be able to get prescription drugs out of Canada and other places to bring down their costs. And right now, I know they're dealing with insulin costs to cap off insulin at $50. Just reading this morning in the news how a family just lost their family member because of rationing their insulin. It was a difficult to buy. Something that we paid for over the years that has been long-term taken care of, and we are just drug companies are just exploiting us. The high deductibles, we're looking, some aspects we talk about getting rid of these high deductible plans because they don't help you. Even if you try to make the threshold for those high deductibles, they will only deduct from your deductible what the insurance company would have paid, not what you're paying. So if you go to get a medical procedure where it costs you $20,000, but the insurance company may have only paid $5,000, you get credit for $5,000, not $20,000. That's not fair. It should be, if your deductible, you're paying into that, that should be taken off. All of these things are being discussed now. You were absolutely right. I said it back in 2006, and I still say it today in 2020. Healthcare, if we don't get our healthcare under control in this state and this country, it will be the demise of small businesses, and not only small businesses, but any businesses.
So, because there's only one choice in the state, there's no competition,
Yeah.
right? You're just Connecticut or self-employed. You can't even choose something else. If you have one employee, you can actually get a choice of many, many more options with national networks. If you're a self-employed person with one person, the only choice is Connecticut with the only state insurance.
Which
So
is,
how does that go?
we need the public option, right? It's so crucial. Unfortunately, it did not pass last session because one of the largest employers in the state, which happens to be an insurance company, threatened to pick up and leave if we pass this bill. Now, the reason they're threatened by it is because when you introduce competition into the market, it's going to drive down rates, and they know that. It's not that everybody will have access to the public option. It's self-employed people, small business owners, and nonprofits, as the bill was written last year. But first of all, it helps the state when more healthy people are coming to our healthcare plan. But more importantly, it helps all the people who will remain with private insurance, but their private insurer will feel the competition of that state option and will bring their rates down. So I'm a big supporter of the public option. I was a co-sponsor last year. I plan to be again this year. I don't think, I just want to be perfectly honest, I don't think that it's going to pass in the short session. The governor, I like him a lot, but his support on this issue is sort of waning. I think those who represent the Hartford region are feeling the pressure of the insurance companies maybe more than we do in Fairfield County. I am very optimistic about the prescription drug reform that Ken mentioned. That's going to have a huge impact on bringing down health insurance costs for small businesses and self-employed people. The drugs in Canada are just as safe. It makes absolutely no sense that we pay so much more just across the border in the United States. And this is, again, I keep saying this today, but this is not a Republican or a Democratic idea. Actually, the first state to propose importing drugs from Canada was Florida, with a very, very conservative governor, Ron DeSantis. He petitioned the Trump administration, which has to actually license us to do this, and said, hey, could we bring in much cheaper and just as safe drugs from Canada? And the Trump administration reacted favorably. So this is an area of bipartisan agreement, and if we're able to get that done in a short session, I hope that momentum will build behind doing a public option if we're lucky enough to still be there a year from now. Thank you.
My name is Jill Alibrandi, and I'm a constituent of Senator Haskell. I brought a few constituents with me from Ridgefield and Danbury, Representative Gucker, and...
Can't hear.
Oh.
Just hold it a little closer.
Okay,
There you
wow. Anyways, in any case, so on February 14th, a concept bill was raised in the Environment Committee to ban the use of wild animals for entertainment and traveling circuses. And I'm looking to get your support and hopefully your co-sponsorship to raise it. Well, it's raised, but to obtain a public hearing in this short session. And I just want to read a little bit for those of you in the community that might not know about the 16 traveling circuses that come across the United States. Traveling circuses are detrimental to animal welfare due to the adverse effects of captivity and transport. Severe confinement, lack of free exercise, and the restriction of natural behaviors cause these animals to suffer, leaving them prone to health, behavioral, and psychological problems. Animals in traveling circuses pose a risk to public safety. Exotic and wild species retain their wild instincts and are often unpredictable. The use of collapsible temporary facilities in traveling circuses increases the risk of escape and serious harm to workers and the public. Animals are displayed in dangerously close proximity to the public in areas that are not appropriate for the display of such animals. So I'm looking for your support, and I'm hoping that we get some traction this year. Last year there were 16 co-sponsors, which again Senator Haskell generously signed his name to, and I'm hoping for a unanimous support in the Environment Committee this year.
So what I could suggest is send us the bill number and the note. I have gotten some of that. I've actually sat down with constituents who are concerned about this. A very eye-opening movie that my girlfriend and I watched a few months ago is, Blood for Elephants. It very much touches on the cruelty and the things that are going on that we don't normally see. So yes, thank you. I will be supporting.
I just want to thank you, Jill. This is one of those issues where it's not something I knew about prior to getting to the prior to arriving in the legislature, but your advocacy around this issue, your sharing Beulah's story, have really opened my eyes to the cruelty. We don't think about this as being a big business here in Connecticut, and it's not that there are a few really bad actors, and those situations are absolutely tragic. So I'll be supporting it all the way. I think we're calling it Beulah's bill. Let's see.
Beulah's, yeah, Beulah's law, and for anyone that doesn't know, Commonford Zoo is located in Goshen, Connecticut. 2 of the 3 elephants that they had died of one in mysterious circumstances, but one was 36, the other one was 54, and they have 1 remaining elephant. So we need to put a stop to it and set the remaining elephant, Minnie, free to a sanctuary. So if anyone supports this, I have a petition that I would welcome all of you to sign if you agree with this, and some information that I would like to share.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you very much.
I am new to Ridgefield, so I've only been here about a year and a half, and I'm just getting into the politics of the city and the state. Oh, I'm sorry, Donna McDermott. My question is, how do we protect illegal immigrants who we want them to fill out the census? We need the numbers. What are we doing to protect them from some of Trump's policies? That there isn't going to be, once the government finds out that they are illegal immigrants, is not going to try and arrest them, deport them, putting them in camps. What is in place to protect them?
So the first thing is the public awareness around the census is so important. That's why we do, it seems like an interminable number of press conferences about the census, but they're so important to making sure that everybody is aware that citizenship and the census count are not at all the same thing. They're not connected. So that's really crucial. But the other thing where Connecticut needs to lead the way is making sure that our courts and other places of public gathering are small sanctuaries for folks who are here on an undocumented basis. There was an incident, just to illustrate this point, there was an incident in a Connecticut courthouse where a gentleman who was not here legally arrived to pay a traffic violation. And when he arrived at the courthouse, it was flagged for ICE, and 5 ICE agents arrived. And really calamitous situation ensued. The gentleman fled to the public defender's office where ICE agents couldn't detain him. He was taking refuge there by the attorneys, and protesters arrived at the courthouse, additional ICE agents, the governor got involved, the attorney general. And this is hugely problematic in terms of the message it sends to undocumented communities. We are no better off in this state if an undocumented person does not feel that they can participate in our criminal justice system, does not feel that they are safe in coming forward if they're a victim of domestic violence, or if they witnessed a crime, or if they want to pay down a parking ticket or a traffic violation. We want to make sure that our courthouses are open to all, and that the criminal justice system does not shut some out for fear that when they arrive in that courthouse, ICE will be called and they'll be deported. So luckily ICE backed off in that individual case. But going forward, I think that Connecticut needs to be a leader in making sure that those courthouses are established as safe zones, so that every undocumented person feels absolutely secure that they can fully participate, whether they're victims, witnesses, or someone who's done something wrong and is looking to make amends, that they can fully participate in the criminal justice system. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Pretty much everything you said.
Good morning. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Robert Murphy Jr. Since 1962, I've been a resident of Ridgefield. I go back to, for example, you were mentioning recycling. I noticed our first selectman was over here. Rudy, can remember when you took the bottles in and you sorted them by the color. So it's a very simple process to do. So my primary question is, for 34 years I taught school. I paid 7% of my budget, of my pay every year until 1990. 1990, 6% went to my so-called retirement fund, 1% went to retirees' healthcare fund. Every year, we have to fight to get the retirees' healthcare fund. Secondly, and probably the biggest thing is, when is the legislature going to decide they've got to pay their bills first and then come up with new plans secondly? Every year we go through the same thing. That the teacher's pension, which is now funded out long-term. My grandchildren, my great-grandchildren will probably, like yours, pay for it, you know. But primarily, I need your help. All the teachers do. I also found out that because we don't have a union represent us, we don't have a contract with the state, there's a problem. The problem is, the state can say, well, we don't have any money. I'll give another example of this. 3 sessions ago, you passed a bill saying that in 2 years, you're going to give us 50% off our state income tax. Every year since it's been, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have the money. Well, if you don't have the money, how can you put in new programs? Well, it seems the legislature needs to get its house in order in terms of, when they do their budget, figure out what they owe first, and then add new programs second. Thank you very much.
So I would look into what happened with this cycle. We're brand new, so our first time with the budget was last year. And one of the things that people complained about was that 1% increase that we put on prepared foods, restaurants, etc. They were saying, well, this is just another taxation rate. The reason why we did that is because we wanted to honor the commitment that was made in for the 2019 financial, was that senior citizens' Social Security would now be tax exempt on the Connecticut state income tax. So starting this year, so when you do your taxes for 2019, if you're making, and it's threshold numbers, if you're a single individual and you're making less than, I believe it's $70,000 or $72,000, your income from Social Security is tax-free in Connecticut. If you're married, I think it's 120, I think is the threshold on that. But they are phasing in the pensions. I'm not sure which pensions are actually being phased in at what rate, but they're slowly bringing the pensions in because we can't, again, like you said, we can't put all of this in at once because we don't have the revenue coming in to be able to back up. Whenever we give a tax break to one aspect, we have to have a revenue source on the other aspect to bring it in. Going in with, we need to tighten our belts. We've done a lot of that over the years. I'm dealing with issues right now with the Department of Motor Vehicle where I've got people who are offending, who are doing things that are illegal, that the Department of Motor Vehicle would normally shut down. They don't have the inspectors to go out and do the jobs because previous administrations cut and cut and cut. The Danbury rest area was a perfect example. Here we are saying, welcome to Connecticut, by the way, bring a flashlight and the porta potties over in the corner. We don't want to open the building because guess what? We cut it to where we couldn't maintain the building, we couldn't staff it, we couldn't keep anybody in. Thankfully, Lamont this year ended that practice. You know, it is staffed, it is clean, and you're giving people a reason to come into the state. I know when I used to travel down south a lot, first place you would go is right to the Welcome Center. Get a feel for the state we're going. Is there any attractions we want to see? If you have been in the car a long time, I could certainly use a break. By hopefully ending some of those practices, we're welcoming people back in. So to cut and cut and cut, it hasn't worked. We've looked into programs where streamlining. But I would definitely talk to your accountant. I would also check on when your pension being phased in, because we are looking to phase them all in. Some aren't 100% right now. They're only portions. But your Social Security at this point is safe, as far as staying with that agreement from the previous administration. And make sure that they're following through. I mean, we are making attempts. No, I know that, but I'm saying the pensions, I am going to look into that. I will talk to, and like it been brought up before, OLR is a wonderful resource. It's a nonpartisan legal opportunity on the 5th floor of the LOB, the Legislative Office Building, where we can go to them and ask, okay, which pensions are being phased in, at what rate are they being phased in? I know some of them right now are 40 to 50%, I'm not sure which ones they are, because there is a vast amount of pensions out there. But we will look into that for you.
I just want to weigh in briefly, and by the way, before I do, it's been alluded to a few times, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that our first selectman is here, Rudy Marconi, who is a real role model for me in terms of responsible and effective state government. So I think we should give Rudy a round of applause. And so you're absolutely right, it's morally bankrupt what the state of Connecticut's done in terms of promising teachers an enormous income tax credit as it pertains to their pension, and then not delivered for over 3 years now. I wasn't in the legislature when it passed, but please know that we've been fighting for it in the little time that we have been there. And I want to address the pension issue briefly in general, because it's important that we keep our promises that we made to our public employees, that we made to teachers who served our community for such a long time. But it's also important that taxpayers know we're making promises today and saving for those promises. And the promises themselves are a lot more affordable. So, for example, when I joined the state government last November, I became a Tier 4 employee. We're no longer offering very generous pension plans that existed decades ago. Instead, we moved away from Tier 1 to 2, 2B, 3. We're now on Tier 4, and it's a 403B plan, which is essentially the public sector version of a 401k that you would see in the private sector. But more important than that is, for the first time in generations, we are now saving, fully funding pensions at normal cost so that the next generation does not inherit the tremendous debt that we've inherited. In this most recent budget, we spent $1.7 billion paying down pensions. That sounds like a really big number, but here's the scarier number. 1.5 of that 1.7 went towards paying down unfunded pension liabilities, went towards paying down those legacy costs that we inherited, because a lot of legislators, Democrats and Republicans, made these promises and then they didn't put a single penny aside. And that's wrong, and we're not going to do it again. So we spent $227 million fully funding pensions for current teachers, current state employees, and future retirees to make sure that we don't have to face this issue once again. But thank you for sharing.
Thank you. So what did you teach?
When did you teach?
What subject?
God bless you.
Hi, my name is Olivia, and I'm actually a resident of Wilton. I'm here mostly just to make a statement as opposed to asking you questions. I have a 19-month-old and a 5-year-old, and with the current projected emissions being released right now, we are, in their lifetime, going to see a 6 degrees rise in global temperatures. And that, the last time the Earth was at that climate, there was alligators living in the poles of this planet. So the fact that that's happening in their lifetime behooves us all to do as much as we can to address this. And I'm so glad you have voiced support for the bottle bill, because it does make a difference. Recycling does make a difference. I would like to encourage, with the net metering that is being discussed, we should absolutely support that. We need to offer encouragements and incentives to get this rolled out. I can't tell you how frustrated I am when I see so many rooftops, buildings that are, school buildings or large buildings that have huge footprints that aren't utilizing solar. And I would like to encourage any government officials to brainstorm. I mean, local municipalities are not powerless. We can offer incentives, but just to get out there and think about. And I know you're doing a great job with securing. I think it was the offshore. So I thank you for your commitment to that, and I just encourage you to do as much as possible.
Thank you so much for being here today and for your statement. I just want to add on one thing, because you're from Wilton, because we're in Ridgefield. There's a bill that just came before the Environment Committee that I fought really hard for, and I hope we're going to pass it into law this year. So Wilton and Ridgefield and actually across the state of Connecticut, there's an idling prohibition. Wilton and Ridgefield led the way here, but the state many years ago said that barring extreme weather, if it's moderate conditions out, you can't idle your car for more than 3 minutes. Now, why does this matter? It turns out that there is an unbelievable 2% of global, roughly 2% of global carbon emissions come from cars that are just idling. They're not even moving. And this is such an easy win, right? There's no reason that you have to keep your car on while it's pumping very dangerous carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which, by the way, has been linked to all sorts of lung cancer and asthma, childhood asthma, all sorts of healthcare problems. So here's the problem with the current law in Connecticut. It gave enforcement powers to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, namely 6 air inspectors who sit at a desk in Hartford. So when I asked the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection how many tickets have ever been issued for idling, the answer is 0. The law is not worth the paper that it's printed on. So what I would like to do, and by the way, I got this idea from a group of middle school students in New Canaan who came to me, but we ought to give that enforcement power to municipalities. And by the way, we ought to let the local police departments keep the revenue that they collect. It incentivizes municipalities to actually enforce the law so that on a moderate day when there's not extreme temperatures, they can make sure that not every parent in the school pickup line is idling their vehicle. It's a small thing, but it's important and it's tangible. I think that, whether it's net metering or methane gas leakage, there's such important issues that sometimes feel abstract when it comes to the environment, but everybody can relate to the idea of just turning off your car when it doesn't need to be on. So thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dawn Jolly, Ridgefield resident. I'd like to know what the Environmental and Public Health Committees, as well as WestCog, which I know that you're on, are going to be doing to stop the acceleration of 5G that Governor Lamont has rolled out. We already know that there are thousands of studies that prove, not link, prove the detrimental effects that it's going to have on public health, as far as for our children especially, for all human beings, all insects, all animals, and our environment in general, and I'd like to know what's going to be done to address this.
I'm just learning about 5G as well, and I've had my cohort in the Environment Committee is a gentleman by the name of David Michelle. We kind of do a good cop, bad cop thing, joking around in public hearings, and sometimes he's the good cop, sometimes I'm the good cop, to really flesh out during these public hearings what the concerns are. I have concerns about the 5G being, how does it affect birds and our bees and our other life forms that are out there. 5G, if anybody doesn't know about it, it's basically a point-to-point microwave system. It's like telephone poles without the wires. And it requires to have, if anybody used to do ham radio, which my father used to do, anytime you used a ham radio and you wanted to get over a mountain, there would be a thing called a repeater on the top of the mountain that would actually pick up the signal and send it down the other way. 5G does this very same thing, and there are concerns as to the health, safety, and well-being at that point. And I think they need to flesh it out more. I know David Michelle is heavily on this. His presentation in Stanford was very enlightening. And I have some legitimate concerns. I mean, we're looking at the most endangered species right now, most valuable species right now on the planet is the bee. Without a bee, we don't have food, we don't have vegetables, we don't have anything.
So how do we ensure as the public that we can demand the public hearing that was taken away from us last session when Governor Lamont did this, literally 11:59 the last day of session, without a public hearing?
I'm happy to weigh in there, and that's just to say that Jonathan Steinberg and I both represent Westport. He's a state representative, but he's also chair of the Public Health Committee. I think that as important as the environmental implications are, what concerns me most and the area where I'd like to do the most listening to learn more about 5G is within the Public Health Committee. And I know that Representative Steinberg is also has questions about this. So it will be at his discretion, and I would encourage you to have a conversation with him. I'm more than happy to connect you to him.
And he was actually at the presentation in Stanford, so I would definitely push that. And make your voice known, just keep sending. And I will say to all in the room, the best way to contact us is not so much a phone call, but an email. Because a lot of times what happens is those phone calls go through an aide, the aide tries to answer the call, and sometimes we don't get it unless they say you really need to call back. But yet that email goes right directly into our boxes, and we see that every single day. In fact, there's probably 600 more of them on my phone right now just to get here. So that would be the way to go about it. And yes, I would press those chairs and say we need a public hearing. I know David Michelle is heavily pushing this. In fact, he was in my office yesterday, yelling and screaming, "Can I close the door in about 2 minutes? I'll close the door."
Right,
loss
other
of steam.
than
And
public health, shouldn't we also be pursuing this energy and technology and also the environmental committees? It's going to have
He's
detrimental effects.
He's pushing that, but so we just ran into something yesterday with, we had a bill dealing in the environment, dealing with fossil fuels and banning certain items. And what we found out that the Energy and Technology Committee also has a bill dealing with this. And subsequently to what we were thinking about doing in this bill would have now destroyed some of our industry dealing with fuel cell energies. So we're trying, so we wound up taking that off the table, knowing that, okay, this committee's gonna take it up, they're gonna take care of these concerns, and we can talk back and forth between the committees to say, look, we wanna make sure this stuff is in. Because when the bill comes up to be ratified, we can always throw an amendment. We can always change it a little bit if we need to. So it's important to stay on top of it. It's important to make sure, be a pest, let us know.
Oh, I have that, they all know my manager.
I think it's
I know you do too. Thank you
So,
for your
yes,
answer. Do you have anything to add to that as you sit on West Coast?
The moderator. I can certainly add.
Mr. Marconi, do you have anything to add?
Sure. West Connecticut COG was mentioned, that's our Council of Governments, and we have begun to study it. The problem with this issue is it's moving faster than what any legislation can handle. It's going to be here before you know it. In fact, we know it's in Lewisboro and it's coming in from West Mountain. Each individual station sends out a microwave signal, and the question is, when we end up with a web of signals over our community, what will that impact be on the bees, but more importantly on all of us and the children? We don't have that information yet, and we have no way of stopping it. The FTC put the pedal to the metal to beat Russia and China, and there's all kinds of articles on it. And Verizon is moving in as we speak. So how do we stop this? Can you at least give the municipality the enabling legislation to make its own decision?
Yes, other states and cities and countries have actually been successful in halting this or stopping it altogether. Switzerland, Brussels, Sweden, the city of Rye, New York, I'm from Westchester, originally before we moved here, New Hampshire, a city in Illinois. I mean, this is happening everywhere, many parts of California. So it's definitely possible, definitely possible. We just need to step up and do it, and we need more support. So if anybody in this room would like more information on that, please come see me, because I have handouts here that I'd be happy to distribute.
But there are no limits on the power of the signal as well. And Austria, when they rolled out their competitive bid for their entire country, put limits on certain parts of that bill that prevents the provider from cranking up that signal strength. And the hotter it gets, the more damage it's going to do. And that's something we have not paid any attention to, are the restrictions that we're putting on this type of equipment being distributed throughout our state and our country, just to keep up with other countries. We need to really take a good look, hard look at the health consequences.
Yes, the FCC has allowed here in this country as well as in Canada, and there's one other country, I think it's Austria, that are allowed to have such high limits. Every other country in the world has smaller limits. So every other country in the world is being exposed to far less radiation than we are here in North America, and that should be alarming to anyone. All of Europe knows this, and many other countries. That we should all stand up and do something about that. So,
That's a fact.
yes. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
We have about 5 minutes left in our session.
I'll try to be quick then. I'm Kristen Dolan. I'm from Westport, Senator Haskell, you are my rep. I am here, obviously, to oppose HB 5044. Like Dawn, my face has been also very public in this. Yep, so Senator Haskell, you mentioned that you support reproductive rights for women and you believe in their choice to make over their bodies. Would that mean that you would also believe in their right to decide for other medical decisions, like, for instance, being injected with poisons? Most people and parents have a religious belief to do no harm to their child. So when they see harm is done to their older child and they've had a reaction, how can you expect them to go ahead with their second or third or fourth child and give them the same vaccines and hope for the best? Where there's risk, there must be choice. No drug is one size fits all. And then, Senator Haskell, you also said that parents of the vaccine, you said that parents of immunocompromised children can't come out into the public because they're so scared, and that's why they're not here. You and I both know a good friend from Bethel who has a vaccine-injured child with autism, and it's very hard for her to bring him around. And there's thousands of these parents throughout the state. It's so hard for them to even leave their house. Christmas night, they don't even get to church as a family because they can't take their autistic baby that was injured. So that happens a lot. Homeschooling is not the answer. Senator Haskell, one more thing you said that I have to clarify. You kept saying it was public school that's included in this bill. It's private and college. Just so everybody knows, this bill includes college. Anybody younger than, I think it's 56 years old or something like that, or 1956, so younger than 64 must comply with these mandates. So that's basically telling me I have no right to a school. I'm completely unvaccinated. So I have no right to go to realtor school. I have no right to go to anything else in this state. You're basically squeezing me out of society, all of my siblings, and all of my nieces, and we all have grown up here in Connecticut. We've been here lifelong. Herd immunity will not be achieved without getting all the adults to make sure that they've had their vaccine. So if everybody in this room has had 72 doses of vaccines, that's fine. But if you haven't, then we're just putting this burden on the backs of our children and our students. And you're basically punishing those of us that want to learn in private school or public school or college. And also, yep. And then I just wanted to say we were there for 24 hours. The testimony lasted 22 hours on Wednesday. And with the 4,000 people that showed up at the Capitol, clearly thousands of families are going to be leaving the state in search of religious freedom and the constitutional freedoms that we should be allowed and granted. And where would the segregation stop? Are we not allowed in museums? Are we not allowed in libraries? Should I not be here today? That was it. I just wanted to comment. I just want to clarify those points. I appreciate your time today, but obviously we're frustrated. I feel like I'm being discriminated against and segregated against, and I just want you guys to understand that. We're healthy individuals.
I understand your perspective. Out of respect for the other folks in line, I won't give a long answer on this again. I can't resist saying, though, I do disagree with the comparison to a woman's reproductive freedom, only because you can't get pregnant because you're standing next to somebody, right? Whereas these other diseases, unfortunately, can be. These other diseases, unfortunately, are spread through all sorts of different contact mechanisms. So I hear your perspective. I don't think that it's an analogous situation to a woman's reproductive choices about her own body. I think that your choices about whether or not you vaccinate do impact the folks around you. My body, my choice is just simply not applicable in my view. It is not the same thing, reproductive health and freedom, and making sure that every classroom is safe for every child. I think that they're different.
Hi, I'm Beth Corso. I've been doing church for 26 years. And I have a question on the Connecticut statute 52350A, parentheses 13, which states that a money judgment means a judgment, order, or decree of the court wholly in whole or in part for the payment of a sum of money other than a family support judgment, which means that a plumber or a politician or any other person who has a judgment is able to enforce that judgment other than an ex-spouse. And why is that? Why is that seemingly archaic? New Jersey allows a writ of execution, New York allows a writ of execution, California allows a writ of execution. That's the only states I've had personal experience with, but I'm sure it's common in most of the states. But you're taking away the most valuable tool of enforcement by not allowing a writ of execution.
I know nothing about the issue. I promise to learn about it though. So let's connect afterwards. I wrote down the statute number, and I would love to learn a little bit more. Perhaps we can try to do something with judiciary.
Thank you.
If you don't mind sticking around, I'm sure fine. If you don't mind sticking around after the panel.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm very, very nervous. Lori Luciano. Well, that's my heart. I'm from Ridgefield. Okay. So I know that this has been a sensitive topic, and it is very near and dear to me. So I hope that people hold their judgments. But this is about our children, and I really did not hear an answer to the question about how Connecticut is going to, if this Bill 5044 goes through, how is Connecticut going to make sure that children are protected when they are forced out of schools? There's tons of special ed and special needs children that will be tossed aside, just like they were in New York, just like they were in California, and nothing was done to help the parents that now had to either move or stay home and lose their job. So I'm basically concerned because I was an educator and I saw that the struggle that parents go through when their children were in school and being taken care of, and then now asked to leave when their child needs a lot of services. Who's going to pay for that, and what is the plan going forward? Because if this bill goes through, we're going to be following New York and Connecticut, who basically turn their backs on people that have religious beliefs. And I just want to know where you know, what are the ramifications if this bill was to pass, and how do you all plan to finance this, basically?
And the children that committed suicide when they got kicked out of school.
So, well, I was just going to say that I have no role in writing the legislation, unfortunately, because I don't sit on that committee, and because it's a House bill. Like I said, I will be the last to vote on it in the Senate. That being said, if I were writing the legislation in an ideal world, I would more narrowly focus on public schools. I think that is where the state has a moral and constitutional obligation to make sure the classrooms are safe for every student, regardless of their personalized medical conditions. The committee has chosen to go with a broader bill, right? They want to incorporate private schools as well. That, of course, leads to more homeschooling in other states.
Right, but private schools don't really give as much services as they do in public schools, so it's not going to help special needs children.
Yeah, I hear you. It's like I said, it's not an easy issue.
It's not, and it needs to really be looked into, and you can't just pass a bill or sign off on a bill when there's no broader picture of how these children are being taken care of. I mean, 7,000 people left New York after June 13th religious exemption repeal, and 7,000 people left. So could we afford that in Connecticut? Could the taxpayers afford that in Connecticut if people now have to leave, and now that their property taxes are going to go up because people are going to be fleeing or having to lose their jobs to stay home and take care of their children? So this needs to be, you know, a concern, you know, because it's going to be real. I mean, California is a mess. New York, you know, people, taxes are so high as it is. We can't have that happen here, whether or not, you know, there's a plan. There needs to be a discussion if this was to go through, because these are our children. I know you keep saying safety, safety. It's not about that. It's about each child. The IDEA, the act, No Child Left Behind. This is important information that we need to support all children, not just vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's not that issue. It's if this was to pass, what is the plan? You can't turn your backs on your citizens and then just hope for the best, because it didn't happen in California, it didn't happen in New York, and people are really struggling in separate areas.
I understand your perspective. Thank you for being here.
Are there any other questions?
Hello. My question is for Mr. Catherine Nelligan from Ridgefield. And my question is for Mr. Haskell, and it regards the Connecticut State Statute 830G, which states that the intended goal is to create 10% affordable housing in Ridgefield and other like towns. And just for the record, I support the idea of 10% affordable housing in our towns. But because 830G only requires 30% of the units being built to be deed-restricted affordable, leaving 70% of them designated as unaffordable. It means the statute can never really achieve that 10% goal. And instead of achieving the intended goal, it actually lends itself to creating high-density housing in towns like Ridgefield and other towns in the 26th district. So my question for you is, what have you done, or what will you do to help modify 830G so it does accomplish its goal of creating 10% affordable housing, but doesn't create the unintended goal of high-density housing in our towns? It's actually for Mr. Haskell, since it really regards the 26th district. With all thanks and
It's a
respect.
state law, so perhaps.
I'll let him ask, but I actually know a lot about that issue.
Absolutely.
I'd be curious
I'd love to
Ken's
hear
thoughts
from
as
both
well.
of you.
So I think you're exactly right in how you lay out the issue. I support workforce housing. I like the term workforce housing better than affordable housing, but I think it's hugely problematic that teachers and firefighters and police officers who serve our communities and work in our communities often can't afford to live in our communities. So we need to do more to encourage workforce housing development in towns like ours. That being said, 830G really doesn't bring us closer to that goal. And the numerator-denominator issue that you mentioned is exactly the problem. I think of it often when I go home to my building in Westport. It was built through the 830G statute. It is wholly unaffordable. There are 30 units in that building that are deed restricted affordable, but the rest really don't bring us any closer to making Westport a town where everyone can afford to live. So the first thing that I think we ought to do is look at state-owned lands that can be used to build 80 or 90% affordable housing units. For example, in Westport, we're engaged in a conversation right now with, and I have to say that really it's the local planning and zoning board that's leading this process, but as state officials, we're wholly supportive of the concept. There's a DOT-owned facility. Department of Transportation owns I think it's an 8-acre facility that they actually really don't use, and it'd be perfect transit-oriented development. It's right on the post road in Westport. It's near a bus stop. It's right off I-95. The town, in an effort to get to that 10%, or at the very least achieve their next moratorium, would really like to build family affordable housing units there. And they don't want to just make 30% of them affordable. They want to deed restrict 80 or 90% of them. This would bring us much closer towards that shared goal. And I think that if Westport is successful in doing this, and we're in negotiations right now over the Department of Transportation for that land, it could set a model for other towns in terms of looking at state-owned land and trying to encourage family affordable housing that is truly affordable. I will say though that the reason I think that's so important, you asked the question, what specific legislative reforms are necessary? There are a whole bunch of legislative reforms, but just to be totally honest with you, none of them are going to happen until we provide an alternative model that shows towns like ours are committed to being more inclusive, to providing housing for workers. A lot of my colleagues in the Senate at least are wholly unwilling to even talk about 830G reform because they perceive towns like the ones that I represent in the 26th district to be exclusionary, and unfortunately we need to change that narrative. We need to demonstrate real interest in building truly affordable housing if we have any hope of truly reforming the law.
Okay, I like that 80 to 90%. I think that sounds great, but I don't think that should be applied to just buildings that are built on state-owned land. Why shouldn't it be 830G applications across the board? Right? If it's a good idea, shouldn't it apply to all?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. The problem is that land in towns like ours, like in Ridgefield or in Westport, is so expensive that in order for the developer to recoup the cost of buying and building on that land, if it were 80 or 90% affordable, the developer simply wouldn't engage in the activity because
Is it not higher than 30? Is it somewhere between 30 and 90%?
That's a conversation we should have. Absolutely. The only reason the state
will up that 30.
Yeah.
If 90 is unreasonable.
I think conversations about how to modify the law are really valuable. The only reason that I talked about the state-owned land is because, in theory, if this deal goes through, the state would give the land to the town for $1, which means there would be no developer costs, no cost to recoup, and make it necessary to have so many units that aren't deed restricted. But I'm so glad you brought that up again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we grappled with this in Danbury. In fact, I have one of those projects around the corner from me. One of the things that they don't tell you is that when one of these affordable housing projects supposedly comes in, rezoning laws no longer apply. So there is no public hearing, there's no dealing with the public. What I was dismayed with was putting high-density housing in an area that shouldn't have had high-density housing regardless of if it's affordable or not. But a developer using it as a loophole to be able to say, well, you're below your 10% threshold, so we're allowed to do this, and by the way, we're sticking it here and you can't say anything about it. If you're going to do that, then yes, the 10% threshold as far as the affordability of units should be higher. Because if we're actually going to have to put one of these units in, then make it so it solves that problem. And it doesn't. So what I saw happen in my community was 70 units went in. Out of the 70 units, the 7 that were affordable were closets. They were literally closets, to where a family in need really couldn't live at this unit. And yeah, it was affordable compared to all the others. In fact, at the time that they were discussing this in the planning committee in the city of Danbury, when they were talking about the monthly expenses there, my mortgage was cheaper than their rent would be. I mean, so they weren't truly affordable. And this has been an issue that I've, development, I have a lot of hard times with high-density housing to begin with. It encourages high-density housing, which then negatively affects our school systems. So now Danbury has done so much of this that we have the largest high school in the state of Connecticut. We need 3 more schools with no way to pay for it. And so if you're right, we need to, if we're putting in an affordable housing project, to bring affordable housing in, the threshold, A, needs to be higher than 10% on that project. I would like to see 30 to 40% on that project. 2, it needs to be truly affordable, not just what the developer decides is affordable for fair market at that time, to where families in need actually have a place to go. We would find out that it would actually stabilize our communities and would help people in need.
Thanks for your question.
That concludes our morning session with our legislators. Thank you, Representative Gucker. Thank you, Senator Haskell, for your time, answering all of our questions, and thank you to all of the audience who came.
There's more coffee back, help yourselves.
Thank you all. Thanks for being here.